When you hire a brand designer, you're getting something much better than just a logo. Much more useful too. This is a real brand guidelines document for one of my customers. And today I'm gonna show you what's inside, how it helps you show up more consistently, more professionally, and ultimately grow your business. If we haven't met yet, I'm Melissa. I run a brand design studio by day and a handmade product business by night. I talk a lot on this channel about brand design, but I know as non-designers, it can be hard to know exactly what is a brand design. What are you gonna get as part of it? So in this video, I'm gonna try to break everything down for you, pull back the curtain, and show you exactly what you get in one of my brand design projects. Let's dig in. So the client for the brand design that I'm going to be walking you through today is a nurse practitioner here in the Phoenix area where I'm from. She runs a telehealth-based practice and focuses on helping women through all the health issues that women tend to experience. Menopause, weight loss, those types of things. So I'm going to walk you through her brand design and show you how the whole project unfolds. All right, so before I dig into walking you through the actual finished visual strategy, I want to back things up and show you guys exactly how I get to this point in terms of what the client and I talk about in order to inspire these ideas that authentically represent their organization. Enter the discovery questionnaire. So before I start anything, I have the client complete this rather in-depth questionnaire. And now we're looking at a completed questionnaire here, so it's going to feel very lengthy because it has all the answers completed. You'll see there's questions about the background of the business. There are questions about kind of how they position themselves in the market. There are questions about their customer demographic. There's questions about their competitors. And then there's questions about the brand style. The brand style clearly has the largest impact on my work, but I can only make good choices about this if I also understand all the other background information, because we really want a brand design to reflect you as an organization, not just maybe aesthetic trends you like or don't like. I usually send it a week to 2 weeks before we have a kickoff meeting. And the idea is that you use the 1 to 2 weeks to complete this, and then you send it to me about 48 hours before our kickoff meeting. And you'll see some of these blue notes in here. These are my follow-up questions from what this client submitted. We'll talk about those in the kickoff meeting, and that enables me to get additional clarity on what you were trying to say in this document. I'm always telling my clients not to mind if I'm re-asking them questions. I just want to hear them talk about things, because sometimes the words we use when we talk about something are different than the words we use when we write about something. I'm usually looking for trends. Usually I'm digging a little further on certain things to figure out exactly what matters to you as a client and exactly who you are as an organization. So this is step number 1 of the whole process, going through the discovery questionnaire and then having that kickoff meeting. Once we have the kickoff meeting and I kind of feel like I've gotten everything I need, I'll take this document and I will boil it down into a creative brief. I'll take the highest points, the themes throughout everything, and recap everything. If you've watched my video that talks all about what branding is, you'll know that I have kind of 3 tenets that I capture: purpose, values, and style. The elevator pitch kind of defines the purpose. We've got the values, and then we've got the style attributes. So those are the things I'm really trying to pull out of that discovery kickoff meeting and the questionnaire. And so I boil everything down into this document. It's a recap of the meeting. It's a boiled down version of that meeting. And I'm going to use this document primarily as my driving force on the creative that I'm then going to create in the brand design. And then usually I've got this other little section if there's just some other miscellaneous items that aren't like defining brand tenets, they're just notes I want to remember. So like this one, she was not set on a symbol. She really had this idea to use like a script, non-script typeface pairing. I write those things down because I always want to understand what you as a client want. And then myself as a designer, I always want to take into consideration what you want, but sometimes my clients ask for things that aren't necessarily good for them. If there's something that you define that you really want, and I don't think it's a good idea, I'll usually then come back around, have a conversation, and explain why I don't think it's a good idea and see if we can come to an agreement before I do too much work on whether that's a deal breaker for you as the client or whether you maybe see my point and are comfortable not having that thing you originally said you really wanted. This is the understanding the problem, understanding what we're trying to communicate before we do a stitch of design. So now that we understand this, let's talk about the actual brand strategy document. This is an actual finished brand strategy for a client that I worked on a while ago with just a very slight tweak to the name to protect their identity. Digging in, this document, it's going to recap everything that we agreed upon in terms of those brand tenets, purpose, value, style. For some clients, they have that documented already before we start our work together. But for other clients, maybe they haven't even thought about it, or it's just been vague in their mind. And so it's helpful to put it all in one place. The other thing is I always want to be driving home that anything I'm recommending in this brand design comes back to those elements. I don't just make willy-nilly creative recommendations. They need to reflect who you are as an organization. That's the only way it's going to be impactful and authentic. We've got the tenets that we recap first. So we've got purpose, their values, giving patients a voice, being transparent, demonstrating compassion, giving patients the freedom to make their own choices. And then their style. This is something I like to do when I'm defining style, is I also like to kind of frame that attribute with maybe what it's not and some synonyms of what might be meant by that word, because adjectives like this sometimes spark different things for different people. So I'm trying to boil it down to kind of exactly what it is, because I might not be the only person using this document. This might go to an interior designer. It might go to a swag company. Heaven forbid they decide to stop working with me. It might go to another designer. So having this really well defined is really helpful for the client moving forward. I always define the attribute calm, but then I usually contrast with what it's not, because we want it to be calm, but not so calm that it's boring. Other words that we think of when we think of calm, simple, minimal, these are things that to us also mean calm. Nurturing, but not mushy, right? Like we want it to feel warm and cozy, but not too squishy. So warm, caring, friendly, and then powerful, but not this like in-your-face arrogant. That means frank, straightforward, honest. I also come back around after I've designed the brand and I add some very real world demonstration of where this trait's coming through in the color palette, in the gradient backgrounds, in the friendly typography, real world photography, things like that. So these things are not things that the client defines in the discovery phase. These are things I add back in at the end, just as additional explanation for why I've done what I've done, why I'm recommending what I'm recommending. Then we've got the logo design. For all of my brand design projects, I show 2 logo design options as part of the process. You're seeing a final brand design, so you're only going to see 1 option here. But just to back things up, I only show 2 because I have found when I show 3, the third one inevitably ends up being a little weaker. And it's not weak in the sense that it is unusable, but it's usually weaker in the sense that it's more expected. And what I found is my clients, because they're not designers, they're more comfortable with what's expected, but what's expected rarely sets you apart in the marketplace as much as you might want it to. So I've just scrapped that third solution entirely and I give people 2 options. So in the logo design process, I'm not just knocking out a single logo design. It probably took me 20, 30, 40 iterations or evolutions or 6, 7, 8, 9 different core ideas before getting to the logos that I actually end up recommending in the presentation. So I always like to explain that because it's very easy to see a finished thing and think it just came out like that. And that's not the case. There are hours and hours and hours of due diligence before you see this. And that's what you hire us to do. So these are her brand marks. For most clients, I like to do a vertical lockup and a horizontal lockup. However, not every logo lends itself to that. So it's not a complete given, but when it makes sense, I do it because there are certain instances one works better than the other. Case in point, horizontal is almost always going to work better on a website than this. Other thing I do almost always is make sure there's some sort of shorthand or symbol version of the logo. For this one, it required creating a second idea that is based on the first idea. For a lot of clients, if they've got a logo that has a symbol in it, we just pull that symbol out. So it kind of takes care of itself. But in a situation like this, that's primarily typographic, I have to actually invent that. And that is really important because in the days of social media, you've always got that teeny tiny little circle or that teeny tiny little square you've got to put something that represents you in. And to put this, at less than 1 inch big is really not very identifiable. Not to mention, most social profiles literally say the name of your profile right next to that picture. And so it's also kind of duplicative. You might as well just show something like this that's a little more graphic and in your feed is going to have more of a presence. I also always include a page of kind of what not to do with your logos. I do this because a designer's never going to do any of these things, but if you've got someone in-house who's maybe doesn't have a strong design background, they might accidentally do something like this, not knowing that it's a bit of a faux pas and kind of weakening the fabric of the brand. You know, not stretching, not recoloring, not changing typefaces, not adding things like outlines, glows, visible drop shadow, or changing the lockup at all of the logo. It's important to just kind of point these things out because you never know whose hands this little brand guidelines are going to get into. All right, so then we dig into the supporting visuals. So this is where a brand design is entirely different from a logo design, but where a brand design is different is it goes further than the logo. It creates an entire system of visuals that you're going to use to support your brand. And so here's where we dig into the visuals. Your most key visuals are going to be core color palette and typefaces, which are going to come next. Now, you'll notice if we had not done a brand design, how would Found Modern Wellness know to use these colors? Their logo is just black and white. We don't implement a bunch of color into their logo. So, like, this is a really good example of doing the additional thinking brings in these colors. This can also play out in a logo that does have color because a logo might just be a single color or two colors, but most brands have 3 colors and sometimes more. So actually planning that rather than willy-nilly just adding a third color for buttons or a third or a fourth color when you start trying to make illustrations or something like that, planning it in advance means that everything is strategic and backing all those brand tenets rather than being decisions made in the moment. So for this client, to talk about how these reflect those brand tenets, we've got the black and white, really clean, classy, modern. But then we've got the soft periwinkle, soft lavender, and soft blush. Now the client had specifically wanted that blush color in there. If you remember, she talked about wanting the brand to feel calm and soothing and friendly and warm. And so these colors, while they are cool tones, their softness reflects all of those things. Now, something I haven't talked about yet is another benefit of building a brand design is a brand design gives you all these levers. So the color lever, the typeface lever, the logo lever, the graphic element lever, the photography lever. You've got all these different levers. So with whatever your brand style you're trying to hit is, every one doesn't have to reflect every element of those style attributes. You know, the logo might be bolder, but then you pair it with a soft color palette and it starts to have that balance of calm but modern, right? I hope you're seeing how doing all this strategic visual work really creates this really multi-layered, impactful experience. Another thing I usually include in these brand guidelines documents is a usage diagram, because it's easy for me to show you this and not all the way know how this gets applied. Because if I'm not the one applying it, it would be very easy for it to turn out all color, no white space, or really black, no light white space. So this helps visualize how much of each color I kind of see within a piece. So if you think of like the homepage of a website, it should feel very white, light, bright. There's going to be dashes of black. The periwinkle is the most prominent color that should be used, but then the pink, the blush, and the lavender also come in. All right, then we've got our typefaces. For most brands, they have 2 typefaces. They usually have a more display typeface for headlines. That one, more often than not, has the most character, and then usually a paragraph body font, worker font, however you want to kind of describe that. For Found Modern Wellness, we've got Playfair display for the headlines, and we've got Graphy for the paragraphs, subheads, things like that. Playfair is a Didone serif typeface. It's very elegant, it's a little like high fashion looking. So it really kind of hits that like luxury and modern look. It's also been pretty trendy over the last several years. So it makes the brand feel fresh too. And then we've got Graphy, which is a sans serif, which feels also modern, but it feels friendly. It feels approachable, very human's not the right word, but I like to sometimes use the word pedestrian, which sometimes can have a negative connotation, but the idea is it kind of feels like it blends and it goes and it doesn't shock your system as someone interacting with it. A good rule for paragraphs is I usually like to make sure we've got a regular, a bold, and an italic at the very least. So that's something to always be looking for. I always show a small sample of how the typography works together because I see it in my mind's eye. I test it behind the scenes. Backing up, that's another good point to know, both on the colors and on the typeface fronts. I can spend a whole entire day testing and selecting color palettes. Even if I think I know, like maybe my clients told me I really want to use red. Do you know how many shades of red there are out there? A lot. And they all feel slightly different. So I can easily spend a whole entire day simply testing color palettes. Then we've got the typefaces. Same thing for that. There are thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of typefaces out there. Even if I'm just searching for a serif typeface, again, thousands and thousands. Of course, I don't look at every single one, but I definitely look at several hundred, if not a couple thousand, before actually making recommendations for my clients. And that involves testing pairings together, headlines, paragraphs, to see what works well and starts creating that desired brand effect. Next, we are getting into more of the actual visual pieces. And so for Found Modern Wellness, we created these gradients with the idea that they feel kind of cozy and calm and like they're enveloping you. And they're very minimal, but also activate the space. You can use them as a full background. You can use them as an edge treatment. I've masked them into shapes to create really interesting backgrounds or containers. This element, this kind of graphic device, not every brand has a graphic device. Not every brand has illustration. Some of them actually don't even have hardly any photography guidelines because it's not a heavy component in their system. So what I'm trying to say is every brand design is a little bit different. You're looking at this sample, but please know if we were to end up working together, yours might look different. It's for sure going to look different than this, but it might have some different pieces. You're always going to have the purpose values keywords. You're always going to have some form of a logo, some form of colors and typefaces. But then these elements I'm starting to show, these graphic elements, are different for every client. Every client has a totally different set. Some have a lot, some have a little. It all comes down to what we specify during our kickoff in terms of just what we want the brand to feel like and what that calls for visually to achieve that. I've also specified iconography because we figured most brands have iconography, but not all. We figured we'd need it for service offerings on the website, marketing collateral, things like that, social media posts, things like that. So we selected a very fine line icon style and let the client know that it can be used in different colors. We can kind of switch it up and we can have times where we use maybe a set of them together in the same color, or we can have times where we use a set of them together in different colors. Again, the fine line nature, the color application backs all those style attributes. Then we've got photography. For this client, if you remember, they wanted, I can't remember the exact words they used in the values section, but it was like something about having choice and understanding and transparency and things like that. And so it made sense to make sure to specify images that have a realness to them, but also a bit of a romanticizing of life. Whenever you're investing in something, you always want to see like the best it can be. But at the end of the day, they shouldn't look super overly contrived. Then finally, at the end of every brand design document, I always show samples of how the elements come together. Now, these are just quick illustrations. These are not actual design projects I was hired to do, but I try to show just enough that you can get an idea for how things start coming together and what the overall look would look like. If you didn't notice, I also designed the presentation a little bit. You can see on some of these dividers how things kind of work together, how the colors feel together. So I always include just a few little samples at the back. And then this is just an example of like the back cover also. And if you remember, the front cover also showed the brand elements on there. Again, just to give you more of an idea of how it all comes together. So this is the complete brand guide, the complete brand strategy in its final form. In its prior to final form, there's the 2 logo options to choose from, and sometimes there's a small amount of iteration. It doesn't always come exactly to you like this the first time you see it, but I will say I have a relatively high track record of as-is approvals or very minor revisions. And I attribute that to just the front end steps of really trying to extrapolate everything I can from my clients and then building on everything they say they are, not what I want them to be. All right, so then one last thing I wanted to show you just in the idea of samples, but I wanted to just kind of show how it comes together, how that strategy translates to a real world next project. So this is Found Modern Wellness website, and you can see we've got the gradients kind of coming in, but look how much white space there is. That was reflected in that pie chart that showed usage for the colors. Very simple application of color, but just enough. It's keeping things nice and lively and making this website not look like a generic template. It feels like this company. Now we've got a little 1-2 punch here with this is simpler, and then, ooh, we get a little punch of color. So this is kind of that modern, that calm. We're kind of combining them together. Here's an instance where we've used the icons all in one color. Doing a little color blocking here. Next page. So this is just another page on the website, the services page. We've used some similar treatments here. This one, because there's more text, I didn't use the gradient, I just used a solid color. And then I believe this is the third page in the presentation. Again, bringing back in some more of those gradients. So yeah, that is what you get when you purchase a brand design with me, and kind of a little bit of a demonstration of the value of it and how it actually plays out in real life on then subsequent projects. So this is the website, but we would keep reusing these elements on brochures, business cards, other marketing collateral, social media profiles, social media posts, things like that. Once the brand design is wrapped up, I send the final brand guide document along with all the assets that I've created. A brand design is not necessarily meant to be a DIY solution. It's a strategy for professional design. However, if you are trying to DIY some of your marketing materials, it definitely will give you a really great starting point because you'll have all those assets to load into Canva or your Word documents or whatnot. Once the brand design is complete, we can jump into the next project the client wants to tackle, whether that's a website design or marketing collateral or any number of items. So that's exactly what you get in a brand design process. If you've gotten value out of this video, please tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more branding design and small business content. See you in the next one.